I'm Doug Stinson, and in this video we will do a deep dive into the N4C Portfolio Competition. As it said on the introductory slide, the Portfolio Competition provides a different way for you to express yourself photographically. That's different from the other competitions that camera clubs typically provide. So, without further ado, let's get started. So what was the motivation for N4C starting this portfolio competition? Well, we took a look at our current competitions, and what we found was that they all consisted of single images being observed with no context around them. We didn't know who submitted them, what other kind of work the photographer did, or anything else. And they were on view for just a very short period of time during which the judge had to evaluate the image, come to some conclusions about it, and then offer critiques on that image. And that sort of situation really made images that had an immediate impact, that were very strong and jumped out at you. Those were the ones that typically got high praise and lots of good comments and would generally win the competition. So they had immediate impact. And they were always images that were pretty easy to understand, that you didn't have to think very much about in order to appreciate them. So, what that means is that we were discouraging the making of images that maybe required a little bit more thought to understand them, and maybe requires the context of other images to really appreciate their meaning. And although those images might not have that immediate impact, they might actually hold your interest longer. So, based on that, what are the goals of the portfolio competition? Well, we want to encourage the creation of images that perhaps take a little bit more time to study, to look at before you can really appreciate what they mean. We want our members to be able to take some time to explore a subject in depth and really create a body of work using multiple images to really explore a concept or a subject that they are interested in. It's also an opportunity for our members to learn how images interact with each other and how the way they interact can be used to create meaning in a way that a single image can't. And once they learn that, they'll be able to exploit that interaction to create more meaningful portfolios. And we also want to allow the photographer to express a personal style or process for making images. Again, when you just see one out of context, you don't get a feel for that. But in a portfolio containing multiple images, then you can really get a feeling of what that photographer's style is. And then finally, we want to provide an outlet and recognition for photographers who do that style of work. Maybe their work doesn't fit into the traditional competitions. If you've ever felt like you didn't want to enter a competition because you didn't think your work would be appreciated, this is an opportunity for you. So, what is an N4C portfolio? Well, certainly it's a collection, and in our particular case, it's of between 7 and 10 images, enough to really give you a sense of a concept without really burdening people. Now, these images have to form a coherent body of work. They have to work together to communicate meaning, and they should reflect your personal style and your personal interests. Now, one thing that distinguishes a portfolio from just a simple collection is the sequence of the images in the portfolio matter. You want to put the images together so that they really work together. Now, how you appreciate a specific image in your portfolio can depend a lot on the image that precedes it and the image that's after it, and how the arc of the entire sequence works. We want to create a situation where your portfolio has more meaning when you look at all the images together than when you look at any of the individual images. In other words, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. Now, on a technical matter, in our portfolios, the images are preceded by a statement of intent and they are followed by an overview image. And in the rest of this presentation, we'll go into more detail about exactly what this statement of intent is and how to make it, as well as the purpose of the overview image and how you can create one. Now, what a N4C portfolio isn't, because there are many different types of portfolios out there in the world. Well, an N4C portfolio is not a collection of your personal best or your favorite photographs. It's a collection of images that work together to communicate a message. They're not a sample of the type of photography you do. There are other types of portfolios. You might be putting a portfolio together to show someone your type of work. And those are all valid definitions of portfolios, but they're not what we're talking about in this specific case. One thing to remember is that preparing a portfolio is in itself a creative process, just as much as taking the original photograph or modifying them in post. You get to spend a lot more time with your images, getting to know them and appreciating them. You get to think creatively about how they should work together and how they should be sequenced. And this can be a lot of fun all in itself and a way to get new enjoyment out of your images. Well, that pretty much defines what an N4C portfolio is. Now, if you're still a little bit confused or uncertain about some of the concepts that were discussed, I wouldn't worry about it. In the next section, we're going to start from a blank slate and work step by step how to create a portfolio. And during that process, I think you'll become a little bit more comfortable with the concepts that we discussed in the previous section. So, how do you go about developing your portfolio? Well, the first step is to come up with a theme. So, what's a theme? A theme is the concept you wish to express, a subject you wish to explore, or relationships that you want to understand and you want to explain them to others. Now, a theme should be broad enough to be interesting, but narrow enough to be expressed in 7 to 10 images. Now, frankly, I've never seen anyone come up with a theme that is too narrow. The most narrow theme can really be made interesting depending on your creativity and how your interest in that subject can be expressed. But by far, the most common mistake is for people to choose a theme that is too broad, one that lacks focus. You may have traveled around the world and met lots of really interesting people and captured really great photographs of those people, which you think would make a wonderful portfolio. So you may choose a theme such as people of the world. But let me offer a cautionary tale. A relatively well known photographer, August Sander, tried to capture a cross section of German life, really getting pictures of people in different walks of life. And what he found was that by 1945, he had obtained over 40,000 images. And he wasn't done yet. So at this point, he kind of gave up on that project. Now, if Sander could not capture the German population in less than 40,000 images, the probability that you would capture the people of the world in between 7 to 10 images is pretty slim. So you probably want to rethink your theme. The next step is to really refine your theme, to try to get it into words that can express what it is. And that Those words are called the statement of intent. And this is something that expresses in words the message or feeling you want the viewer to take away. Now, this statement of intent is actually quite critical, not only to getting your portfolio evaluated, but to get really good and helpful feedback from the assessors. They are going to review your portfolio primarily on the basis of how well it communicates what you've put in your statement of intent. Now, to make your statement of intent as strong as possible, you should show confidence. After all, if you aren't proud of your portfolio, why are you submitting it in the first place? So, what you want to do is not to use vague and uncertain words like I hope to show. Rather, just state explicitly, I show. Now, according to the rules, you're allowed up to 75 words in your statement of intent. But quite frankly, the fewer, the better. And the reason for this is if you have a kind of vague idea of what your intent is, it's very easy to kind of ramble on and on and on about it. But if you work on really getting it down to as few as words as possible, it'll really help you understand exactly and precisely what your statement of intent is. And that will make it more effective to the assessors. It'll also help you a lot as you go to the next step of selecting images. Now, the statement of intent is also not about technical issues of photography. So don't talk about what f-stop you used, what shutter speed you used, or how you did your post-processing on the image. The statement of intent is all about the message that the portfolio is supposed to communicate. You also need a title for your portfolio. And again, the rules say that you can have up to 10 words to do this. But once again, typically the fewer words, the better. So here's an example of a statement of intent. The title is Rural Palouse. Springtime in Washington State's Palouse region is full of rolling hills awash in brilliant greens and yellows. Farms and towns are widely spaced. Nothing is thrown away until it deteriorates to the point of uselessness, and then is, quite literally, put out to pasture. So, what do you think about this statement of intent? Is the takeaway message clear? Now, I think it's pretty obvious that this person is really in love with the Palouse region, especially in springtime, and has probably a lot of great images that show these rolling hills and farms and equipment. And they really want to share that with you. But if you think about it a little bit more closely, I think what you'll see is buried in this statement or intent are actually three different themes. One is the rolling hills awash with greens and yellows. That is the natural landscape. A second one is farms and towns widely spaced, something about the human interaction with that landscape. And finally, that nothing is thrown away. Instead, it is put out to pasture. And this is something about how the human landscape evolves over time and how people think about the buildings and equipment they are using. Now, each one of these would make a really good theme. And if you focus down on one of those, you could make a really strong portfolio. But if you try to address all three, you're going to really dilute your message. Here's another example. This one is titled Bridge for a Working City. The Golden Gate may be famous, but it is the San Francisco-Oakland Bay Bridge that does the heavy lifting. From an elegant span across the bay, the bridge penetrates deep into the city, appearing in more prosaic forms where least expected. This is a bridge that must perform its function, often oblivious to the conventions of aesthetic. A bridge integrated into the lifeblood of the city. Now, I can tell you exactly what the intent of the photographer is in this case because this is my portfolio. And my intent was to highlight the architecture of the bridge and how it can vary from the beautiful to the very practical, and also about how it appears seemingly at random at various locations within the city when least expected, and is kind of integrated into the structure and architecture of the city. But what did the assessors see? The very first paragraph where it says that the bridge does the heavy lifting. And that's what they thought this theme was about. And so they were asking questions like, where are the photos of the traffic? And completely missed the idea of the variation in architecture and its integration into the city. And as a result, not only did my portfolio score poorly, but more importantly, the feedback I got from the assessors on how to improve it was not very useful. The next step, after you have developed your statement of intent, is to assemble these images that will communicate that statement of intent. There's a number of ways to do this. The best approach is the photo project. Here's when you decide on a theme and then you specifically go out to shoot images designed to express that theme. Now, this can be done in an afternoon if the theme is such that you can photograph it in your kitchen, let's say, or it may take several years to complete if it involves going to specific locations or seeing things at certain times of year, or just accessibility to the items that you want to photograph. And because of this, you shouldn't really think of the portfolio competition as something that you decide in January that you want to submit a portfolio and start working on it. Rather, pick photo projects that you're interested in and work on them over time. And when you feel that they've come to fruition, that's the time to start thinking about submitting them to the competition. Now, although I've emphasized planning here, I don't want you to discount serendipity. I often advise photographers if they're in the field photographing one specific subject, they ought to stop, turn 180 degrees, look in the opposite direction, and see what they see. Sometimes what they find there is even more appropriate and more interesting than the thing they set out to photograph. Now, of course, that's not the only way to do it. Because you have a specific personality and a specific interest, it's highly likely that over time you've accumulated photographs that actually are related to some theme or idea or concept that you have in your mind simply because that's something that excites you or interests you. And so you can create a portfolio by scouring your archive and pulling out those images that are part of that theme. For example, the Oakland Bay Bridge portfolio that I talked about previously was not a photo project in the sense of me specifically going out to doing it, although I had something in my mind. Those were photographs I had accumulated over a number of years just because I found the bridge fascinating. And every time I was in San Francisco, I'd probably find some opportunity to take a picture of that bridge. Now, one thing that's common to all of these approaches is that you should turn off your internal critic. This is not the time to accept or reject images based on any criteria other than they kind of are related to the theme of that you're trying to express. And you should just collect lots and lots of images. There's a saying that's particularly appropriate when you're working on a photo book that your collection will consist of 250 bad images, 200 not so good images, and 75 great images. Unless you accumulated those 250 bad images and 200 good images, you never would have found those 75 great images. So throw your net wide at this point. It's only after you've collected those 250 bad images that you can start to think about filtering your images down to the ones you want to include in your portfolio. Now, you can discard images that fail to meet your minimum technical standards. And I want to stress minimum technical standards. And even more importantly, those standards that are required by your statement of intent. So, for example, while you might be tempted to throw away out of focus images, if your statement of intent says that you want to communicate softness or romanticism, out of focus images may work very well to do that. And so you wouldn't want to throw them out at this point based on an arbitrary standard of technical perfection. The next thing to do is to rank the images by how well they express your statement of intent. And when I talk about ranking images here, I'm not talking about giving them a numerical score from 1 to 100, although if you wanted to do that, you could. There's many ways to rank them. People may spread them out on a table, rearrange their order. They may put them in different piles, put them in different piles and resort them into different piles, but get an idea of which ones are the ones that work best to express your statement of intent and which ones are not so great. Then start to look at how the images work together to express your statement of intent. You may find at this point that some images by themselves work really well, but they don't work very well with the other images that you have at your disposal. So you may actually have to set aside that one perfect image that seems to perfectly express your statement of intent, just because it actually ends up detracting from your portfolio because it doesn't work with the other images. And it's only at this point that you should really concern yourself with the quality of the images as standalone images. Clearly, your technically perfect images will make for a stronger portfolio, but only if they already meet the criteria of expressing your statement of intent and working with the others to express the statement of intent. So don't let that one outstanding image override your judgment based on the criteria 2 and 3. Now, at this point, I would suggest putting your images aside, take a nap, go eat dinner, come back maybe in a day or two, and look at the images again and see if you come up with the same conclusion you did the first time through. After they settle in your mind, letting your unconscious work, you may decide that your first choices maybe weren't actually the best, and you want to redo it. And you need to repeat this process several times until you really think you've got it right and until you narrowed it down to those 7 to 10 images that really express your intent. The next step is to sequence the images. And this is what distinguishes a portfolio from just a collection of images. Now, when we're talking about sequences here, we're not just talking about time sequences, although a time sequence is a perfectly reasonable way to organize your images. But there are other ways to sequence them. Ask yourself, is there a natural progression or arc to your images? It could be up to down, dark to light, early to late, grief to acceptance. You might want to show a wide view to provide context, followed by a close-up view to hone in on your main subject. You may want to compare or contrast two images to ask the viewer, what's the same? What's different here? And you want to put those two images together. Generally speaking, it works best for the images to flow in a harmonious manner. That tends to keep the viewer comfortable and therefore interested. But it's not the only way to do it. You may actually want to jar your viewer into a recognition of something that they may not have thought of before. And therefore, counterposing two really different images that kind of jar the viewer might be the right thing to do. It all depends on what you're trying to accomplish in your statement of intent. Now, let me give you some examples of sequencing. We're going to take the same images, but we're going to sequence them in a different order. And I want you to pay attention to what your emotional reaction is to the sequence of images. So here's the first one. So try to remember in your mind what your emotional reaction is being to that sequence. And now we're going to put those same images into a different sequence. Did you maybe go ouch when you saw the hand after seeing the knife? Hopefully you saw kind of a very different emotional response to this two sequences of images. Even though the images are exactly the same, the sequence can make a difference. And when you're putting your portfolio together, you want to take that into account. Now, this whole process, as I mentioned earlier, is a creative process. So you're always wanting to learn, review, and revise. It's an iterative process. The first time through may not be the right answer. You want to relook at what you've done. You really want to let your images speak to you. This is a really good opportunity to really visit with your images, get to know them better, and ask the images what they're telling you. During this iterative process, you may discover that an image that you previously rejected, now, as you look at your almost final sequence, you realize that that rejected image would work better than one that you got in the sequence now. So go back and pull it out of your reject pile and put it in. In this process, maybe what you've learned is that the images are saying something that's a little bit different than what you put in your statement of intent. Let the images speak to you. Maybe the best thing to do is to now keep the images, but go back and revise your statement of intent. In fact, the images may be telling you that you were really interested in a totally different theme, and you want to go back and start over from scratch. All valid reactions to this work. It's only at this point that you want to think about really technical issues and how to fine tune your images. Use your post processing skills to optimize them. One of the easiest to understand examples that I have are photographs that have a large amount of sky in them. We all know the color of sky. It's sky blue, right? But if you look at a photograph, you may see that some skies have a little bit more blue in them, a little bit more green, a little bit more purple. And if you look at the images individually, they all look like sky blue. But when you put them next to each other, you realize there's a significant difference. And this can be quite jarring to your viewer. So you may want to go back and do some color correction to make all your skies have the same tone of blue. And although it's easy to understand this for sky, it holds true for all the other colors in the image. Is the grass the same green in all of your images? You've now created the body of your portfolio, but there's two more things that you need to do. One is to create a statement of intent image, which you will put in front of the body of your portfolio. It'll be the first image. And the second thing is to create an overview image, and that will be the last image in your portfolio. Now, there's a couple of points I want to make about the overview image before we get into details about how to actually create it. The first is that the overview image is not evaluated on its artistic merit. Rather, the overview image is just a tool that's used by the assessors to remind them of what they saw when they reviewed your portfolio body. And the second is it does give them a little bit of help in understanding how well the images work with each other. Now, to make that work, it must be the case that the images on your overview image are exactly identical to the images in the body of your portfolio, except for size. So you cannot edit them for aspect ratio, color balance, or any other characteristics. Simply copy and resize your main images onto the overview image. You will also want to keep the arrangement of images on the overview image simple. And the reason for this is that when the assessors are giving you feedback on your portfolio, they will want to be able to easily identify which image they're talking about. For example, they may say something like the third image from the left in the second row. And if you make your arrangement too complicated, it'll be very difficult for them to make such simple assignments. The actual instructions for making an overview image and a statement of intent image are in separate videos, and I will now show you where to find them. The videos that show you how to make an overview image and a statement of intent image are located on the N4C YouTube channel. To get to that channel, type into your browser bit.ly/N4C YouTube. And here you'll see a list of all the videos that are available. If you scroll along towards the end, you will see the video for creating an overview image. You'll also see the video for making your statement of intent. And if you're interested in seeing the winners of previous year's competition, you can also find them as well. Now, how do you actually submit a portfolio to N4C? Well, what happens is that your club will set up your own local portfolio competition. It's not really a competition. You won't be competing against other club members and their portfolios. This is just a way of collecting your portfolios, and they'll just be forwarded up to N4C. You'll have to talk to your club officers to find out exactly how to do that and when this competition opens and when it closes. But once you find out that information, it's very simple to submit your portfolio. The form that a portfolio takes is just a sequence. And you may be familiar with sequences from the nature or photojournalism divisions. A portfolio sequence is no different than those, except that you're allowed to have between 9 and 12 images in a portfolio sequence, where the other divisions only allow a maximum of 4. I strongly suggest that you go to the N4C YouTube channel and watch the video on creating and submitting an image sequence. This really gives a lot of good information about how to create your sequence and how to submit it through the Photo Club Services software. If your club does not use Photo Club Services, then you'll need to talk to your club officers about how to submit your portfolio. But fundamentally, for you, it should be no difference than submitting any sequence. There's a lot more information on how to create a good portfolio. The first thing you should do is to check the official rules. And to do that, go to the N4C website, which is n4c.org, and hover over competitions, and then go down to portfolio competition rules for whatever the current year is. And you'll be shown a PDF with all of the official rules related to the portfolio. And you should definitely read those over carefully. Second of all, there's lots of additional documents on how to prepare a portfolio. And to do that, go to the other N4C website, which is n4c.photoclubservices.com. And you don't need to log on to this website. In fact, you shouldn't log on. Just go to Organization, Documents and Files to download, and then go down to Section 4, Interclub Competition and Judging, and you will find a lot of great information in here. I would check Section 4G, Instructional Materials for club members, and you will see several documents related to portfolios in this section. Well, that pretty much covers it. I hope you've learned something, and I hope you've been inspired to create your own portfolio. You certainly should have lots of fun thinking about how it should pull together and what images you want, really enjoying the images that you have. It really is quite a creative act to put together a portfolio. I'm pretty sure you'll enjoy it. So by all means, have fun, and I hope to see your portfolio in the next competition. Thanks for watching.